gotta be a lot.
Wait,
Ready?
wait.
So, on August 7th, 2 atomic bombs were dropped. The first one on Hiroshima, and then 3 days later, Nagasaki.
Oh, can you stop?
It was the 6th of August.
And the 9th.
The 6th and the 9th
Yep, at 8:15 in Hiroshima.
at 8:15.
That's minus 10 points.
Hey, that was on video.
You didn't
remember?
say
It was on
That's
video.
embarrassing. It was.
Okay.
First off, you gotta start over. You can start over because you didn't get your name assigned.
Thank you.
Come
thank
on,
you.
Coopah.
Okay,
The
I
video's still rolling.
Yeah. I'm not stopping.
What?
It started. I'm not stopping.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Cooper. I'm a Virgo. Probably all know this by now. So, on August 6th and 9th, 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Little boy on Hiroshima and fat man on Nagasaki. Around 226,000 people were killed immediately when the bombs were dropped in total. From that, around 246,000 were then killed by radiation sickness. And then thousands more were affected by brain defects, birth defects, cancers of all sorts. Some people even survived both blasts, but their lives were living hells afterward because they had scar burns, they had lost eyesight, they had lost hearing, everything. This devastated Japan, especially the Japanese hope. Not only Japan was affected by this though. In both Nagasaki and Hiroshima, there were POWs of Allied soldiers that the US did know about before they dropped these bombs. They knew that there were Allied soldiers in these cities, but they still dropped the bombs anyways. And they didn't drop these bombs on any sort of huge military forts or bases. No, these definitely did have garrisons, but that was only because these were highly industrialized, highly populous centers of tons of people. They chose these targets because they were large civilian targets. They wanted to break the morale of the Japanese people by wiping out as many as possible. They chose these cities because there were, especially in Hiroshima, hills surrounding the city that would contain the blast and force it back on the city itself. They also, throughout this entirety of the war, they had done extensive bombings over multiple cities and islands that were controlled by Japan. And especially on the Japanese mainland, they dropped leaflets, little leaflets to warn the people that they were about to be bombed, especially in cities that had high populations, like Tokyo, Kyoto, places like that. They dropped these leaflets, and then these people evacuated. The leaflets worked because the Japanese government did not want their people to be killed by these intense firebombing campaigns. So the people left to go to the countryside. But these leaflets were not dropped in 2 specific places, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, because they wanted the people to stay there so that they could understand the level of destruction that these atomic bombs could do to people. They brought not only squadrons to protect this plane, but they brought instruments in other planes as well to record the level of devastation. They used the Japanese people as guinea pigs in their little twisted science experiment. The President of the United States, President Truman, said this, and he said these exact words, I'm quoting word for word. Japs are savages, ruthless, merciless, and fanatic. The President of the United States, the one that was the most important in giving the go-ahead to do this, did it because he had this view of the Japanese people. Another thing, after the bombs fell, the people in these cities were left without any sense of direction. First-hand stories depict of people wandering through gray, desolate streets. Houses collapsed. They could hear people screaming under collapsed houses. They could hear moms crying over their lost children. Some would even cradle them in their arms, their dead babies in their arms as they were walking through these streets trying to find the rest of their family. And after all of this, there was still radiation around these cities that gave all of these people different variations of sickness, acute radiation sickness. And this radiation also was from these sorts of fires that were caused by the atomic explosion, because Japan's cities were entirely built of wood for the most part. So these fires would then be caught up in these radioactive winds, and they would make little firestorms that would storm through the already desolated places of these cities. And they would kill even more people and bring even more destruction to these cities. For the people there, it was a very, very low chance of survival, like talking 10% or something. These targets were also chosen because they were very big places to strike fear into the heart of Japanese society. Japan was losing the war. They knew that, but they were still galvanized from their spirit and from their culture. But the US wanted to crush that very hard. So what they did was they made sure to psychologically damage as many people as possible. And that's why these cities were chosen.
And I have about 4 questions.
Let's just do questions.
Questions?
But there's a lot there. All right, who has a question before I call on people? Alexander.
When you said 10% or something of people survived, do you have like an exact example of like how many people survived out of how many people died?
So the exact number is unknown just because of the level of devastation that it had. But these cities were in like the hundreds of thousands of people, and hundreds of thousands of people died. So that's where we get these numbers from. Aaron, saw your
Do we know the context of the quote from the president?
Context of the quote. So, context of the quote was they were sitting down. So, before the atomic bombs were dropped, they had a large discussion of where and when and like how this would all happen. And there was multiple people like Oppenheimer, of course, was there. There was another man, Stimson, there, who did not want, this is a side tangent, I will get back to your question later, but Stimson specifically did not want a city like Kyoto to be destroyed not because it's a giant center of cultural significance or of historical significance, but because him and his fiance have recently honeymooned there. That's why they didn't choose Kyoto, because the Americans did not want it to be destroyed, not because it was a good target, but because the Americans didn't want it to be destroyed. So, back to your question. Could you please ask it again?
What was the context of the quote?
Context of the quote, thank you. So, when they sat down to discuss this, they were talking about like how this would affect the Japanese people, and the president replied to these people in this conference room, that quote. And it's like, they were just talking about how this would affect the people and should we be doing this? So that's the context of the quote. Yes, sir.
Do you think that they chose those cities with the mountains around them to contain the radiation so it wouldn't go everywhere? Because they wanted to damage the Japanese, but they didn't want to kill them all. They just wanted to show that they were bad.
Okay, yeah, I think I get your question. From my research, that was not the reason why, but it could have been a very good way to do it. But this thing about radiation is that the mountains would not have probably stopped it. It would have definitely helped, but winds pick up radiation from like dust particles just as easily, and they can carry it over hills and mountains just as easily as if it was like a flat plane.
What is the modern state of Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
The modern state of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, the cities themselves are actually doing very good. The atomic bombs that fell they did not cause any major lingering radiation. It caused it for a couple months, but nothing much more than that. But the people themselves are still heavily affected by it. There are still multiple cases of like acute radiation sickness. And the people that were part of this explosion, the survivors, they're called Coopah, and they are very heavily discriminated against because there is this fear that they are like unlucky, or there is some sort of spiritual energy around them that like brings bad luck.
They're given free healthcare, by the way, by the Japanese government, so know that.
And free healthcare, yep. Most places do.
Is that it? Okay. Ms. Bankston.
Is this a rebuttal or is it?
Well, if I were to do a rebuttal, all I would say, because he mentioned the firestorms, how they killed even more people. Well, it's been proven that the rocky terrain of Nagasaki actually helps squander a firestorm. And there's actually not a firestorm that was created at Nagasaki, it's only Hiroshima. So that was my only point. Anyway, now for my point. I'm Lily. I'm an Aquarius, which I'm sure again you all probably know by now. But I'm here to defend the decision to drop the atomic bombs on Japan. And something I'm sure all of you are, like the concept of at least, I'm sure all of you are aware of is, I think it's a vocab term, this idea of Bushido, like samurais and whatnot. Its definition is the code of the samurai, stressing unquestioning loyalty and obedience in valuing honor above life. I personally would have thought by World War II that this ideology of valuing honor above life, it would be squandered. It would be gone just like the samurais were. But
Bankston,
what?
I know Aubrey's not on a computer, is she?
She is.
We're not doing anything right now. We're listening. Close your computer.
So anyway, I thought that this ideology of valuing honor above life, Bushido, would have been gone by World War II, 1945, but it wasn't. And so we see all these instances of the emperor, whose name was
Hirohito.
How do you say it?
Hirohito.
Hirohito. He was the grandson of the Meiji Emperor, the 15-year-old boy that we read about. But he also deftly promoted this ideology in various forms of propaganda. And there's also this controlled press this controlled press that they would send out along the radio, and so it began like a daily campaign where it was like all about how you're supposed to die for the emperor, and so it was titled the Die for the Emperor campaign. And so he called the masses, the Japanese masses, to die gloriously in defense of the nation. And it just increased this hysterical rhetoric, calling, like I said, the 100 million to fight and die gloriously for their beloved emperor. And then again, because I told you how he's the grandson of the Meiji Emperor, so there's also this religious aspect, because the Meiji Emperor was supposed to be the last descendant from the sun goddess. And so to the Japanese people, they were not dumb. It was just, I think it's a high level of indoctrination, because from their childhood, you're taught to listen to the words of the emperor before your parents. But anyway, we have disgusting examples of this Bushido mentality taking over people, because there's this battle on the island of Okinawa, and a survivor named Oda Masahide. She wrote that the military distributed hand grenades to the civilian populations as a means to commit suicide for loved ones. And so anyway, there's all this propaganda saying, like, if American soldiers come that you need to commit suicide because they're going to like murder, rape, and torture you. And so we have like all of these instances of mass suicides. Like I said, Okinawa, a Japanese troop of 4,000, their lieutenant general told them to all like surprise attack on, launch a surprise attack on all of the American soldiers there and fight till they were all dead, and they did that. And then he, after, right, it's all in the name of the emperor, he committed suicide. But from the American veterans who talked about it and come out about it, that's not the most traumatic thing, because they saw women grab their children and run off of cliffs into the safe arms of death, opposed to surrendering to the American soldiers. Because again, this idea of death is a fate far better than anyone that has surrendering in it. And then in 1945, Japan's emperor Hirohito, I've been saying it differently in my head. Japan launched, Hirohito said that they should launch this Operation Kitsugo, I think. And it was a defense strategy that focused on inflicting tremendous casualties on U.S. forces to undermine the American will to fight for unconditional surrender. So at this point, he knew they were going to lose. But in his eyes, it's how little can I lose? Because the ultimate loss is just saying unconditional surrender. And the loss was not all of the people. The loss was the unconditional surrender. Because again, it goes back to this idea that they value honor above life. And so this Operation Kitsugo, it called for an increase in defensive suicide tactics. And so all of their aircrafts were to be converted into kamikaze planes, which I had heard of, but apparently, there are these planes that they would strap bombs and explosions on, and then the person who manned it, he would try to get as close to the military target as possible and then blow it up. So essentially, all the kamikaze fighters committed suicide because they had to. And then they would all be released in waves of 300 to 400. And then the naval defense would be manned all suicide torpedoes, suicide attack boats, and suicide divers. Because all of that death, because they knew that they didn't want to fully surrender. And so they launched that when they knew they were going to have to surrender, and they launched that when at best they were going to at best it wouldn't be an unconditional surrender. And even, because a big negative side, a terrible side of the bombs is that it killed so many civilians. But even the Japanese government, again, part of this Operation Kitsu, they mobilized citizens, and they taught males from 15 to 60 and women 70 to 40. They trained them with hand grenades, swords, sickles, which is it's like the thing the Grim Reaper has for farming, knives, fire hooks, and bamboo spears in preparation of joining the regular forces during night infiltration patrols. So they're actively including their civilians in this war. But on August 6th, as Cooper mentioned, little boy dropped on Hiroshima. And Hirohito, he did nothing. He was informed of everything that happened, the mass destruction, the masses of people that perished, and 12 hours after, and he didn't do anything. He said it was terrible, because what are you going to say when you're in charge of all these people and they die under your watch? But he didn't start creating any terms of surrender. And it wasn't until 3 days after, and Nagasaki was bombed, that he started drafting some terms. surrender. And even in his address, which was the first address by a Japanese emperor to everybody through radios, he never once said the word surrender, because there would have been an all-out riot from the people, because their honor and their reason worth living is wrapped up in like not surrendering. And so, okay, when considering conventional warfare, okay, not atomic bombs, all of these, like I mentioned, all the people grabbing their children and then running off of the cliffs, that happened on the peripheral islands, not the mainland. And so there were statistics on how many American soldiers would have to die for every Japanese soldier who would die. And so on both sides, the casualties are really, really high. And so if if the Allied troops were to go to the mainland, then there would be, again, like I say, high casualties on both sides, as well as more and more mass suicides. And so the bomb really just, it was a grand enough gesture, I would say, to finally like get the people to realize, as well as the emperor, that it's just too much, you have to stop fighting. So the bomb, I know it sounds diluted, but the bomb saved lives, because more people would have committed suicide, more people have died trying to save this honor that they had. So the bombs, they saved Japanese lives. Thank you.
Oh, questions for Lily?
Yes, Lucy?
Why do you think that they still haven't boosted him? Ideology for so long?
Well, it's the emperor did it, because the
People still kill themselves.
the people, so the emperor, he lived by this, right? Because the expectations were for him to be honorable, and then also the way that they placed them and they looked at him on such a high pedestal, then they're going to mimic whatever he does. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, in your honest opinion, do you think the bombs were worth it? Because I know you argued that it saved lives, but they're still in a way taking lives. The radiation that people mentioned, people still have radiation sickness and have stuff from there. So do you think there could have been like an alternative, or it was worth it to do that?
I don't think there was an alternative, because like I'm saying, more people have died, but also we have nuclear power now because of this. Not to sound callous, but nuclear power, nuclear power plants cost little to run. They produce 0 carbon emissions, and they're the most reliable renewable energy source we have, other than like sunlight. So I do think it's worth it, because I think more people would have died from stereotypical warfare tactics, if that makes sense, if we were to have just kept on fighting. Yes, Sarah?
Do you think that the way they died is kind of like on 9/11, like you can either burn or jump?
The people, close to ground zero?
Like how, I don't know, would the explosions like engulf them and they die instantly, and that way you don't know what's going on?
It's a thing. So radiation in the air it's measured by this acronym called RIM, and so it's essentially like how much radiation is in man. And so it really depends how close you are to ground zero, which is the direction, like directly above where the bomb hit it. And so some people, they did die instantly, right? Because the atomic bomb is 35% thermal energy, and so it was really, really, really hot. And so that's where we see like the welts and such. They come from like disgusting burns. And so, I'm sorry, what was your question?
So would it be less painful to not know that you were about to die and then just being gone
Yes.
and dead, or taking your whole family and running off a cliff.
They didn't have enough time to like.
They also didn't have-
I feel like the mental stuff of running off of a cliff would like be worse mentally than like just magically dying. So was it like a better death?
I was not those people, so I cannot tell you.
I'd rather be instantaneously
Yeah.
immolated than throw my child off a cliff and chase them.
Yes, Alexander.
So, were a lot of the civilians in like Japan like all over, or mainly in those two cities because they were most populated? Like, were they like kind of brainwashed in a way to like only have like the Bushido ideals and like fight against the American people that were coming into Japan? And so like would they have died anyway to like the American soldiers while trying to fight them?
Well, they probably would have if we were to have gone on the mainland. And so on the peripheral islands, we see examples of how people would have reacted if we were to go onto the mainland with typical bombs and grenades and just typical instruments of destruction. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Cooper had a question.
I rebuttal.
Counterpoint.
Okay.
So, what your argument stated was that the people of Japan were essentially brainwashed, or they were indoctrinated into this belief. What may seem like indoctrination to us is a different culture. It is not a culture that we technically agree with, but it is a culture. And saying that that is wrong is saying that that culture is wrong. And saying that it would rather be better to just kill those people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki than to send more American troops in and have them die and have the people die is placing higher value on the American soldier's life than it is on the Japanese citizens. Another thing, why did they drop the bomb on Nagasaki? Yeah, Abe.
I have an answer. Because it wasn't heavily affected by military yet.
So they dropped it on civilian targets?
Not necessarily, right? It wasn't like, okay, the military was all over Japan, but it wasn't decimated by bombs or like other things of that nature.
So it hadn't been touched yet, so that's why they dropped the atomic bomb on it.
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay. Nagasaki was not necessary. They could have dropped it. They could have dropped it on Hiroshima. Yes, it took 3 days for the emperor to start forming things, but do you know what an atomic bomb does? It can psychologically damage so much of the Japanese society. Would you rather have lived your life spent knowing that you were going to die at some point from radiation, from a giant bomb that came out of nowhere in the middle of night? Or would you rather have died?
That's like the same thing.
In the morning.
Or would you rather have died for your country knowing how you were going to die?
Yeah, Sarah, what's your question for Cooper?
So you say that it's just a culture that we don't really agree with, so it's not bad. But Mr. Dockery always says that the culture is not wrong unless it's hurting people, and that culture was making a bunch of people commit suicide. I think that was
It is a fair point, but I feel like culture, hurting people, that it was not hurting other people. The culture was, in our view, self-destructive, but that doesn't mean that it was wrong.
The culture did not distribute hand grenades to the population of people so they can kill themselves. The culture did not send out radio messages talking about how they should die for the emperor every single day.
In our minds it is. What about theirs? Bushido has been in place in Japan for many, many years. It is an integral part of their society.
I have a question. Bushido is the way of the warrior.
Yes.
Yes.
So, you're saying that the civilians are warriors?
Mhm.
Me?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they were warriors, but Bushido evolved into some sort of like militarism in the entire country. It was what drove that behind it.
It didn't, though. It was.
It did.
No, the military
No.
tactics like influenced the culture, but it did not turn into a cultural value. No. That's what I'm saying. So, anything else?
All right. Go button hold.